There we go. So if you miss it or want to go back, it's always available on our Facebook page, our office Facebook page. If anybody doesn't know how to get to that, reach out to me because it's a private page. You can't just search for it and find it. But everything that we do for classes, mostly, I record. So, yeah. So this is a new series for me. I haven't taught this one before. So I came up with, I said I was going to do listings today. And I thought, what am I going to fill 90 minutes with? And then I went on to the listings and actually did a deep dive. So even those of you that are buyer brokers or mainly work with buyers, I think this is a great, thank you for signing on, because I think it's a great exposure for you to know what you're looking at when you're looking at with a listing with your buyer clients. Some of the deep dives, how things are figured out, like square footage, unfinished spaces, when a manufactured home input is used. So before I get going, is there anything in particular that you guys are hoping to gain on this? Why are you here today? Everybody looks away. Except Julian. He jumps right in there, leans forward. I love it. Hey. What are you looking to get out of this class? Why are you giving up? Oh my God, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 7.5 hours of your life to come sit and listen to me and you guys, hopefully. What are you looking for?
Golden nuggets and what others are seeing in the market.
Absolutely. Good answer, Jay, because you know what? It's not what I have to say. It's what you guys have to say. I love real life experiences. I love learning from each other's mistakes sometimes or other brokers' mistakes. Because that's kind of, it's amazing to me. Well, it is and it isn't. Blake and I actually think that we have the best trained brokers anywhere. And so when you guys run into a broker on the other side who's not with our company and you see some of the mistakes that people make, it's kind of mind-boggling. We had one with Carmen last week where she had a buyer or she had a listing, broker from another firm. Actually, it was a managing broker, ran the office. And when it came time to turn in, they did an inspection and they returned a 35R with no attachment from the inspection. And then they also submitted a blank form 34 with a punch list of everything they wanted fixed at the same time. So did they want an extra 5 days? Did they want to just negotiate the items on the list? And if so, we actually sent that one off to Annie. And Annie's answer was, well, if you just deal with the things on the list, the 35R for the extra 5 days pretty much goes away. But she argued with Carmen up one side and down the other that was how you did it. And Annie said so. And we got word back from Annie that absolutely not how it's handled. So your credibility when you're negotiating an offer like that, not only with the other broker, but with your clients. Can you imagine what our clients were thinking at that point? So we wanted the transaction to stay together, but how do you gently tell the other person that they don't know what they're talking about, especially when they're the managing broker? So it's a slippery slope. And in this particular market, there's a lot of people. We've never had more brokers affiliated with the Northwest Multiple right now. I think we're up to like 37,000. At the dip back in the recession, I think there was about 27,000. So even with the attrition of the people that got out of the market, there's a lot of people out there that do not know what they're doing. And I've always believed that the forms are the foundation of your knowledge, your expertise, and frankly, your success in negotiating and getting offers accepted. I don't think anybody would argue with me on that one, that just knowing these forms backwards, forwards, inside out is something that can absolutely differentiate you from the other 10 or 15 people submitting offers. So this class today, we are going to take a deep dive into listings, Form 17s, and I see Kelly Lang on there. Good morning, Miss Lang. So hoping to share some strategies. I see some other people on there that do a lot of listing, and it will be great to get their feedback. It's interesting to me. I think a lot of people were probably put off by the name of this class because they think, oh, I don't do listings. I don't need to know them. Nothing could be further from the truth. Knowledge is power. My dad used to say that. So the more you know, the stronger you're going to be. And thank you, everybody, for joining me this morning. So without further ado, I pulled up the forms that went with listings, and I think I stopped at 15, which was pretty eye-opening to me. I mean, I deal with them every day. People are always asking, or the multiple is kind of thumping you that, you know, you said it had an ADU, but you don't have the addendum. You said it was green home, but you don't have the addendum. You said no showings for a week, but you don't have the addendum. And I think a lot of people are just not aware those are out there. And as a buyer broker, I know the first thing that you do is go to supplements and you take a look and you see what's there. And part of what we're going to cover today, I mean, we've got listing agreements, agency agreements, letters of authorization, subagents, first right of refusal, all of those things that, again, if you're representing a buyer, you need to know what those mean. And you also need to know when to use them. So I think what I'm going to start with this morning, believe it or not, is the listing input sheet, because I get questions on a lot of these things a lot, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I'm not going to go over the sheet itself. I'm actually going to go over the manual. So everybody knows that off to the right of the form, if it says man and then the form number, that's where your manual is, and that's where it's going to basically give you a roadmap and guidance on how to fill this out. Excuse me. So I'm going to screen share. Please feel free to jump in, unmute yourself, hold down your space bar, ask questions, comments. Chat is fine, but I can't always see the chat if I'm screen sharing. So here we go. Starting away with the listing input sheet. So the listing input sheet is basically the form that you use no matter what kind of listing you're using. Manufactured home, multifamily, doesn't matter, vacant land. So you do need to have, and everybody should have taken the class to do your own listing input. Why? Because it might be a Sunday night, you need a quick price change. If you've got a listing, you might need to flip it from active to pending inspection. There's a lot of different things that you can do with that listing input designation, or class, I guess is what it's called. There's a couple things you cannot do. You can't turn an active listing into TOMK, or temporarily off market. That has to go through the multiple. And the maximum time on a TOMK, by the way, is 45 days. That's a multiple rule. They will remind you at the end of 45. Here's a trick. So if you're a buyer broker and you're looking for property, I hope you're not limiting yourself just to the actives. I hope you're also looking at everything else. Pending inspection, and don't forget about TOMK, or temporarily off market. People take their properties off market because maybe there's been an illness in the family. Maybe they're doing a remodel. Maybe they've got company from out of town, who knows? But they can take a property off market for up to 45 days. That does not cancel the listing. So the person who has the listing is still, so there's nothing wrong with you calling that listing broker. Do not call the seller, because it's not an unlisted property. It is still listed, but call that listing broker and ask what the circumstances are. Are they still willing to sell? Why are they taking it off the market? How long do you expect it to be off for? Don't forget about those. There's not a lot of them, but in this low inventory market, you cannot leave any stone unturned. And that's a big one. So obviously all forms need to be turned in by 5 p.m. on the list date. And so here we go, down to the assistants filling in the forms. Area is pretty straightforward. Community, the common name. So maybe it's Geneva, maybe in Anacortes, I'm not that familiar with them, but whatever that community is called, that is what is going to be put in there. Now, the problem with doing a search for just a community is because some brokers don't fill that out, or they fill it out with a word or a community name. Maybe they've spelled it wrong. So it's not the best search tool. You can try it with and try it without. But I'm a believer that in the beginning, your search should be as broad as possible to grab as many listings as you can, and then go back and narrow it by community if that's somewhere that they absolutely positively want to be. So offers, select the time when the seller intends to review offers upon receipt or a future date. Now, everybody knows that just because somebody puts in an offer review date does not mean that they can't look at offers and accept offers ahead of time. So let's stop there for a second, because we've talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it again. Strategies. You have a buyer. They have a 7-day window before they have an offer review date. This is the house that your buyer wants. They're a strong buyer. They're pre-approved. They're willing to waive financing with a 22 EF. They're willing to do a pre-inspection. They're ready to go, clean offer, but they do not want to have a bidding war. How many times have you guys who represent buyers heard that? I want this house, but I don't want a bidding war. So the strategies as far as submitting an offer right off the bat, and please feel free to jump in on this, because this is one, I'm going to stop the share here for a second. This is one that we've seen it work both ways. Would the seller get upset if you submit a really strong, beautiful, over ask, clean offer the day the property gets listed with an expiration date of 9 o'clock that night? Do you think they're really going to get mad about that? No, I don't think so. You think they get mad, Bolly, or you're just saying that you see that happen all the time, that they accept offers the first day out of the chute, even though they say they've got a 7-day window?
Oh, I've been running into this problem actually pretty much every day. I've been submitting offers and I do the same day expiration date, and then still, first off, they don't have anything, and they call me back. Okay, you want to change your offer? We give you a little window. So I change the offer, and still I don't get it. Somebody else jumps in and they release their earnest money, and my buyers don't feel comfortable releasing their earnest money.
Okay, so what you're talking about though is competitive offers. What I'm talking about is jumping in ahead, trying to jump in front of that train and clear everybody else off the table.
That's exactly what I have been doing. Actually, I don't wait for the offer review date.
But what you're telling me is your offer is good, but it's not blowing the seller away. So they're saying, yeah, that's really nice, but yeah, we're going to wait and see if we get something cleaner that either has a really strong 22 AD or a really big earnest money they're going to release to us, or, you know, something that equates to an all cash offer. That's the difference. What I'm talking about is if you've got a good offer, or if you don't, if you've got just a good offer, there's nothing wrong with submitting it. Now, in most cases, the seller is not going to accept that offer. But do you really want to be the one calling your buyer 3 days after the property gets listed to say, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I see our property that we really, really love just went pending? And they're going to go, yeah, but the offer review day isn't for 3 more days. Managing expectations. If you have not had the conversation with your buyers about this strategy, shame on you. Because I would rather be proactive and manage those expectations than have to be reactive and try and explain to your buyer why they didn't even get a bite at the apple. They didn't even get a shot at that listing, right? That's Kelly. Feel free to jump in here. You got a lot of listings.
I mean, Lori, and this weekend alone, I probably said that to 3 brokers. But what time are you reviewing, Kelly? What time are you looking at? I said, hey, if you bring us an offer that's amazing, my seller just might take it. And I do get that, where my sellers get really excited and they want it, and they're just like, we're done, Kelly. We don't need to show the house anymore. Cancel the open houses. Let's sign it. The agents that choose to wait till 5 minutes prior to the expiration date at 5 o'clock drive me crazy. Because here's the problem too, is they don't get a chance to basically do highest and best, okay? So throughout the whole time, I'm texting like, hey, and a lot of agents are always feeling it out, like, hey, what can we do to sweeten the pot? You know, can I give you 22 AD, hey, is 50K over enough, right? They're asking those kind of hot or cold questions. And they're also, is there a waived inspection? So they're feeling it out there, you guys. And if your clients give you free permission, the seller does, to say, yeah, let them know that the inspection's waived. Let them know that we have a 22D escalation, $20,000 over list, you know? And I have had clients take it. So I'm like, you guys don't wait till the last minute to submit offers. I think it's a really bad strategy as a buyer's agent for sure. So.
Thank you. And you haven't lost anything. So what's worst case? You write a really beautiful offer. It's got a really good highest and best. And for whatever reason, the seller says, nope, nope, nope. We've had 40 showings today. I'm going to wait out the 7 days. I'm not going to budge off that. Okay, fine. Go back and write another offer. Now, you might change your strategy on the next offer. Maybe on the next one, you are going to use an escalation because you do know you're going to be in a situation where the seller is going to be looking at a whole bunch of offers at the same time. But going in with an escalation on the first day wouldn't work because there's nothing to escalate it off of. Does that make sense? You've got to have something to escalate it off of.
Yeah.
So if you're going in on the first day, you got to have a highest and best, right?
Lori?
Yeah.
I had a situation in Fairhaven. There was a house that was listed for like $1,050,000. And I know I got basically the people that got the house, they submitted early, and they basically psyched out my clients by that early submittal, because they were still financing and they only went 50K over. And that's exactly what my clients would do. But my clients were like, no, if they submitted early, it must be fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's circle back. Managing expectations. You don't just grab a buyer. Okay, you go out, they call, you go show them the house they want to see. But at some point, hopefully, before you get into the real thick of it, you're having a deeper conversation with how this process is going to go. You're going to get pre-approved. But here's the different strategies. The time to talk strategies with your client is not when you are sitting down and writing your first offer with them, right? You don't want to do that because they're already kind of freaked out. Oh my God, it's the perfect house. This is the one. I want to make it happen. And then you're like, well, do we want to use a 22 EF? They're like, what the hell's a 22 EF? Do we want to go, highest and best? Or do we want all of these things? Do we want a pre-inspection? Do we want to go in? They're like, what? We just want the house. We don't know what you're talking about. We just want the house. So I've touched on a few of them, but if you're smart, and this is good homework, I would come up with an entire list. You've got a buyer book of some type, but I would come up with an entire list of various strategies and different things that you are going to have a conversation with your client about, non-refundable earnest money, the whole 9 yards. And hopefully you're going to have that conversation with them, pull the forms out, sit down with them and say, let's talk about this. Because right now it's not just about the money. The money doesn't always win the house. How we are going to structure this offer may have a different outcome. So let's talk about that. And this is something that is not going to happen in 5 minutes, right? Because you need to kind of explain the forms to them, and then you need to explain the strategies that they can pick. They're going to say, well, I don't know, Gavin, what do you think? What should I do? And you're going to say, well, let's talk about that. You've got 2 different strategies here. It's not my house, but I'm going to share them with you, and then we can have another discussion about it, okay? So managing expectations, talking to them up front, really critically important. Back to screen share, here we go. So I'm just getting this is just the basic nuts and bolts. Prohibit blogging. You don't see that too much, but if yes is selected, members and subscribers displaying NWMLS data on their public websites may not allow blogging on a seller's listing. Give me an example of a company that blogs and how they do it. There's one really prominent one, does it all the time. Who is it? It's Redfin. Do you guys get updates from Redfin or see updates when some Redfin broker isn't even, who knows, from the area, has gone out and seen the house and they add some comments to it, right? That is the blogging that they're talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look on, so when Redfin puts the listings on their website, they actually allow Redfin agents only to add comments to them, like big yard or houses in great condition or super view, whatever it is, but that's blogging. AVM, automated value, allow automated valuation. What does that mean? Again, I'm going to go back to Redfin and also Zillow. So when the listings show up on a Redfin website, in about 90% of the cases, it will say the list price, 800,000, and then it will say Redfin estimate, and it might be $799,034, or it might be $820,000. What is that? That's kind of a tip to the buyers out there. If Redfin thinks the property is priced fairly, overpriced, underpriced, what you will notice from Redfin is they never deviate too much from the list price. It's rare that they do, but sometimes they do. Do you think buyers look at that? Heck yes, they look at that. So again, this is another conversation to have with your buyers, because they're not just looking on your website. They're not just looking on Remax or Kelly Lang or Lori Christensen. They're looking at Zillow. They're looking everywhere. And when they're on Redfin, when they're on competitor sites, you need to know what they're seeing. One of the things they're seeing is this, we call it an AVM. That's kind of a big word for just saying an estimate. What does that particular company think that property is worth? Internet advertising, everybody pretty much allows. Okay, let's stop at finished square feet for a second, because I get this question a lot. What's included and what isn't? By the way, this is just a manual for the listing input form. So if you need to refresh yourself on any of these things, if a buyer asks you, this is where you're going to go find it. So finished square feet excludes the garage, excluding garage that is finished. So do not include attics and basements unless they are finished living spaces. For instance, if there's a furnace in the middle of the room or it's suitable only for storage, do not treat the room as a finished living space. It doesn't really matter, because you are not going to go out there with a tape measure and tell us how many square feet that property is. You are actually going to get it from a source, hopefully public records, a prior appraisal from the seller, or some other third party. But that's what's included, so you know. Unfinished square feet. So when you're looking at that, it excludes the garage, which is unfinished but potentially livable. So there's a lot of less expensive homes where they've actually converted that one-car garage into a family room. If they've converted it, then it is actually finished square feet. If the attic or basement has a ceiling which is too low for anyone but kids to walk around without bending over, do not include it, right? The old homes with the gabled roofs and you have to walk up and you can't really even stand up, that's not included. That doesn't mean, though, if somebody's looking for a fixer, they couldn't raise those sides, put some gables in, and turn that into finished living space. But for right now, it's unfinished. So you have a client who's looking for 1,800 square feet. Don't turn your nose up at the properties with 1,200, because they may have unfinished square feet that is not included in that, but is potentially convertible. Don't forget about that. The test is whether it is potentially livable. And they talk about phrases like nice, large storage attic are common. So.
Hey, Lori.
Yep.
Laura Rayberger has a question.
Oh, thanks. Hey, Laura, go ahead.
So Rachel and I were putting on a listing last week, and we noticed that it was really strange. So the house had finished square foot and then unfinished basement, but it totaled it together and put the square footage as the finished and unfinished combined, where in the past it hasn't done that. Usually it just defaults to the finished square footage. So I'm wondering if anyone else has noticed that, or if.
What was the source of that again, Laura? Was that just on the listing?
Listing. So we put in the listing and we put in, you know, that it had like 800 square foot basement and the house was like a little over 1,400 square feet. And in the past, it normally just populates the finished square footage like at the top of the MLS. But last week it populated both combined, and we were like, well, that's weird. It's saying the house is 2,200 square feet. It's automatically calculating the unfinished space and the finished space. And so we didn't know if that was like a new change on the Northwest MLS or if anyone else had experienced that.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know of any changes on the input sheet. We do have a whole bunch of changes that have just hit, but that's the topic for another day. Anybody want to jump in? Saw the same thing, Jillian, on a listing on South Woodby. So, moral of the story is heads up, you guys. Be really, really heads up when you're looking at square footage. I hadn't heard that, Laura, but I'm more than happy to follow up with multiple and see what they have to say.
Okay, that would be great.
Yep.
Yeah, we were kind of surprised about that.
Yep, happy to. And they may have with their input.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Possession. Boy, is this a hot topic. Possession is a hot topic. I get one call a week minimum where you're representing a buyer. Matter of fact, this just happened. Buyers made a really great offer. Seller says, we love everything about it, but we want to stay in the house for 45 days after closing. It's going to take us a while. We want our kid to finish school. And so if you'll give us our 45 days, then we'll sign your offer. We'll even pay rent. We're happy to pay rent. So of course that broker called me kind of in a panic and said, according to Annie Fitzsimmons, there's absolutely no way that we are supposed to ever let the buyer or the seller stay in possession past. This is one area that I'm going to kind of disagree, not kind of, I am going to disagree with Annie. Now, legally, she's right. Legally, as soon as that property closes, the seller becomes a tenant. And Washington State right now has a very onerous landlord-tenant act. And it doesn't even have anything to do with the pandemic anymore. They just took the opportunity to make some changes to the Landlord-Tenant Act that are very unfavorable to an owner of a property. However, if you've got a buyer who has been out looking all over Kingdom Come for a house, and they finally get the perfect house under the terms that they want, and the only thing they have to do is give the seller an extra 45 days, what do you think my answer was? What do you think my answer was? Have the conversation with the buyer. Document it, okay? There's risks. There's inherent risks with doing what this seller is asking you to do. But I want to talk about it for a minute. And it's going to be your decision, Mr. Buyer, what you want to do. You do, yeah, heck yes, you do run the risk that on the day after closing, for whatever reason, we got Jekyll and Hyde, and that seller, now tenant, turns into Jekyll and says, I'm not moving, I'm staying here for the next year. I got to tell you from my past experience, I really haven't seen that happen. I've seen there be delays because the seller, whatever they were planning on, gets delayed, i.e., their house closing in Texas or a new job starting for one of the, whatever. I've seen that happen. But for somebody just to deliberately change the locks on the door, dig their heels in and say, yeah, nah, I don't think I'm going to move. I haven't seen it happen. Could it happen? Sure, it could. I mean, anything can happen in this world. But I look at the risk and I look at the return. And the risk to me is so inherently small that, and I probably shouldn't be recording this, but I'm going to tell you that if that's the only thing standing between you and a signed off offer, give the seller the extra time. Now, the next question I always get is, do you use the form? Do you use the seller occupancy after closing form? Sure, why not? I would rather have you use the form. They're going to fall under the Landlord-Tenant Act anyway. There's no getting around that. So I would rather have you use the form than use a blank Form 34 and practice law. Practicing law, anytime you put pen to paper on a blank Form 34 and start writing out things, you're practicing law. And you are now held to the same standard that an attorney is held to. It's going to happen. We're going to have to use it occasionally, but if there's a pre-printed form, please use the pre-printed form. All right. So back to, we're almost done here with this. Common interest community, we're not going to talk about that too much. Homeowners association and dues. So let's stop here for a second. What's a third party approval required? The most common example of that is a bankruptcy. So what happens in a bankruptcy is the owner of the property obviously declares bankruptcy with an attorney, and they are basically defaulting on a lot of their debts, for whatever reason. And if the house is one of the assets that the bankruptcy court determines needs to be sold to help offset those bills that are due, then a third party approval is required. What happens is a bankruptcy trustee contacts a broker and they list the property for sale. So you see something come up and you're like, oh, hot damn, great price, great buy. You make an offer, you don't see the part about the third party, your buyer gets all excited, and then you get the call from the listing broker that says, thanks so much for your offer. The court, it'll go in front of the judge in about 10 days, so we'll let you know. And your buyer goes, what? What do you mean I got to wait 10 days? Oh, and by the way, there's nothing to stop other people from making offers in that 10-day window. So the odds of you being the only person, here's what will happen. The bankruptcy trustee will pick right before they go in front of the bankruptcy judge for approval. They will pick what they feel is the best offer, and that's the one they're going to submit to the courts. They don't just hand 10 offers to the judge and say, here, you pick. Nope, the bankruptcy trustee is going to pick one. But up until the time that that bankruptcy judge actually signs his or her name on the offer, and oh, by the way, they can change anything on that offer they want to. They can change the price. They can change your commission. They can change anything they want. Now, the good news is I've never seen them change a commission, but it doesn't mean that they can't. So bankruptcy courts are kind of God. So you just need to understand that. We don't see many of them, but in this environment, who knows? We might start seeing them again. So that's what third-party approval is. It might be a short sale requiring lender approval. So those are things you just need to understand what a third party is. Bank or REO owned. That means that the title to the property is actually transferred to the lender that made the loan because the buyer, the owner, defaulted. So bank and REO stands for real estate owned. That's lender slang for a property that the bank had to take back because the owner defaulted on the loan. That means that the bank is actually entitled on the property. That's different from a third party approval with a short sale. Accessibility. So if you check this, if property has any accessible features, check the applicable box. If you do check one, you have to provide information. You can't just say, yeah, it's wheelchair accessible, turn your listing in and be done. You have to add the accessibility information supplement that goes along with it. Same thing with green building info. So if the property, this is interesting because a lot of times sellers and builders say, yeah, that property's green built. Yeah, we put some solar in it and we've got automatic lights. So yeah, it's just check that box. Well, that's not good enough. And the multiple will catch you on it because if you see a listing that has the box checked that it is a green building, it actually has to have a supplement that goes along with it called the Green Building Information Supplement. It has to be certified. This is a whole different process. Built Green, LEED, or Northwest Energy Star. And so anyway, if you've got a client who is looking for a green build, you can do a search by this field. I don't see a lot of them out there. They're generally a little bit more expensive on the new construction, but just FYI. Same thing with accessory dwelling unit. This is a hot topic, ADUs. If it's attached or detached, this box would be checked. Insert. So if the ADU is detached, insert the finished square footage of the ADU. Note that square footage for attached ADUs will be included in the main structure. So it's not separate. So if it's detached, it's noted separately. If it's attached, then it's combined. And when to use the various listing input sheets. Manufactured homes. This one's really simple if it's on leased property in a park. By the way, we can sell manufactured homes as long as they are attached to a piece of leased land. Can we go out and sell? I'm gonna look at you guys on this one. Can we go out and sell a manufactured home where somebody says, hey, I just want to get that thing off my property? Lori, can you just do a listing just for the manufactured home? Maybe somebody will want it, move it onto their property. Can you do that?
Nope.
Nope.
No.
No, no, we are not licensed to sell trailers, boats, manufactured homes that are not part of a leased land. You cannot sell them individually. Sorry, I tickled my throat. So remember that. A good example is out at the Glen. We can sell a park model trailer that is attached to a piece of land. We are not licensed to sell just the park model trailer. Just so you know. All right. Any questions on this? Nope. Am I boring you to tears? I think that's about it. I think that's all I'm gonna hit on that one. Let's change gears. I'm gonna hit the agency agreement for just a second. If you haven't looked at this for a while, I suggest you might want to, just to refresh yourself. So, as Annie pointed out in some of her more recent videos, unless stated otherwise, by agreement, every one of you is an agent of the seller. So, we ran into that with transaction coordinators, and that's a story for a different day. That we're still working our way through. But here's
Wait, will you say that again, Lori? Will you say what you just said again?
About transaction coordinators?
No, about agency law. I said I must have misheard you, or I'm totally backwards on agency law.
That we.
You said every one of you, unless. I thought you said every one of you, unless otherwise stated, is an agent of the seller. But that's everyone is unless there's a written agreement.
There would be, unless additional duties are agreed to in writing, signed by the seller's agent, the duties are limited to the following. Let's talk about this for a minute. The first thing is that just because you're showing a buyer doesn't mean you're representing that buyer. And if that buyer goes out and finds it for sale by owner, one of two things has to happen. You either need to enter into an agency agreement agreeing to represent that buyer, or you're going to enter into an agency agreement and a type of listing agreement with the seller allowing you to be a dual agent, right? So the problem has become, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Tessa, but I thought that's what Annie had been saying, is that we are, unless otherwise specified, agents of the seller when we go to show the property.
Yeah.
Backwards?
Backwards. That's
Backwards.
Well, that would assume.
Is my understanding.
Yeah, that would assume sub-agency.
Yeah, so she like drills in her, she has like agency, and I'm like embarrassed that I don't remember it because she's like, if you don't know
That's
this,
what
it
I
could
was
be the background on your phone. And it's like, and I swear it's like, if there's a written agreement, let's see, if there's no written agreement, you are an agent of the buyer, unless there's a written agreement otherwise, right? So if you had a listing agreement, you would be the agent of the seller. But if you don't, if you are not seller, if you're not the listing agent, then it defaults to you are the buyer's agent.
That's right.
Right?
Because here's, I was getting confused because when you hire a transaction coordinator, when you are a listing broker, but you don't,
they default to the
they default to the buyer. They default to the buyer, and therefore there is where our conflict is coming that we are trying to figure out.
Yeah.
That one will probably land in the legislature. Unless you have something, and I'm going to jump over here and share my screen, because this is called an appointment of a subagent. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, because I don't know that how many of you are actually listing property, but an appointment of a subagent. So when you take a listing on a property, the company Remax Gateway, Remax Whatcom County actually becomes the listing broker, and we appoint a subagent who is you, the listing broker, right? So the listing belongs to the firm. So if you are going to go on vacation, or if you want somebody else to handle that listing while you're away, or actually be able to communicate and negotiate with the seller, in order to do that, because remembering, sorry, thank you, Tessa, for straightening me out here on a Monday morning. I'm still waking up. The only way that you can actually have a broker represent that seller on your behalf is by appointing a subagent. Some people go so far as to do this when somebody borrows an open house. I don't necessarily agree with that because just because you're sitting in open house, as long as the listing broker has had a conversation with the seller that I'm going to have one of my team members sit that house open, that doesn't necessarily mean they're representing you. They're just there to show your house and maybe prospectively pick up a buyer. However, if that seller thinks that the person is actually representing them, and that is what you want to have happen, then you're going to do this appointment of subagent. And in it, the seller authorizes the firm to appoint blank as the seller's listing broker with respect to the property. And then we have, so that would be the listing broker. And then a listing subagent, firm appoints a listing subagent to act on the seller's behalf. This is really common if somebody goes on vacation and asks another broker to take over a listing. If offers come in, I want you to handle this. I'm going to be in Timbuktu. I don't want to be sitting on my phone handling this. So I'll pay you a referral fee, but you're the one who's going to be dealing with the seller. So there's two durations for this. So it shall be for the duration of the agreement. So it's going to go till the end, or it shall be from and to. So I'm going on vacation for 10 days. I'm going to be gone from April 1st to April 10th. So that subagency might only last for 10 days. So you have two choices on that. That's just a little heads up. If somebody comes and asks you to take care of a listing while they're gone out of town, this is a form that should be filled out and turned in to the firm. And when else might you use this? Any other? That's probably the most common that you're going to have. So moving along here. Who can tell me the difference between an exclusive 1A listing agreement and a 1B agency listing agreement? First of all, do you ever see a 1B out there? Probably not. You don't see a lot of them. Anybody tell me what the difference is, just in case you do? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the difference between the two. Anybody? So
Means I can market it only through my brokerage.
Yeah, sort of. It basically means the difference is that the seller reserves the right to sell the property to anybody who you haven't brought it to their attention and not have to pay you a commission. So the seller says, you know, look, Trisha, I really want to list this property with you, but my neighbor really wants to buy it. So you might, I do not recommend the 1B. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I never recommend it. I would rather see you do an excluded buyer. If you ever do an excluded buyer, here's my one rule with that. An excluded buyer using a Form 1A, which is a regular listing agreement. And you can accomplish the same thing, which basically says if I sell it to my neighbor, an excluded buyer, I won't owe you a commission. But if you're ever going to do that, you always put a time frame on it. Always, 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 always. It does not run concurrently with the whole time of the listing. I mean, it can, but you're going to get thumped by me or Blake because it's not a good idea. I usually say, how long do you think it's going to take them? How long it's going to take your neighbor to figure out if they want to buy it or not, which you know they probably won't. Oh, I don't know, a week or so. Great. How about if I give you about 5 days, you get in touch with them, and at the end of 5 days, that excluded buyer goes away. Why is an excluded buyer not a good idea? And here's what you tell the seller, in my opinion. Mr. Seller, I understand that you've got to deal with your neighbor. I would prefer that you go talk to your neighbor before we even list this property. Because what an excluded buyer means is that even if I bring you an offer, $50,000 over the listing price, you have no obligation to sell it and pay me a commission if your neighbor comes through and you strike a deal with him. That's an excluded buyer. An excluded buyer is simply that, which means that if you end up selling to that excluded buyer, you don't have to pay a commission. Another question, though, that I get is the property was listed with ABC firm, and the seller, let's keep it simple. The seller canceled the listing. Now they're listing it with me. But there were 2 buyers that were kind of interested in the property. If either one of them come through and make an offer on the property, am I going to get paid a commission? That is different from an excluded buyer. Because if you do a release of listing, it specifically points out in there that the seller shall not be obligated for the payment of more than 1 commission. So when they relist the property with you, that relieves them of all of the obligation to have to pay any kind of a commission to the former listing firm or any buyers that they may have brought. Does that make sense? So that prior listing firm, if the release is done properly, has absolutely no claim to any of that commission. That's a common misnomer. It's a common misunderstanding. Now, what if one of those buyers had made an offer? Let's get fun here. What if one of those buyers had made an offer during the term of the prior listing agreement and didn't go together? Fast forward, property expires, you relist the property, buyer comes back out of the woodwork, says, I want to deal with you, I want to make an offer. I made one before, it didn't go together, I want to do another one. So, and they say, I don't want to work with my other broker, I haven't talked to him in over a month, I want to work with you. Or I want to work with Susie Q at ABC Realty. I've changed brokers. Is that original broker who brought the original offer, let's say 3 months ago, entitled to a commission? And the word that is always thrown around is procuring cause. I can make an argument either way on this one, but it's pretty clear to me that the answer is no. Because the likelihood of the new offer having any similarities to the original offer is slim. There's going to be different dates, there's going to be different prices, there's going to be different terms, there's going to be different things. So again, when the property was listed before, once it expires or is released, the obligation for commission payment, except in rare occasions to that original listing broker, is nil. So if you have a buyer that asks you that, that's what you're going to tell them. Make sense? All right. So our exclusive, wait a minute here, I'm going to pull up a different form. So we've covered the difference in Form 1A and 1B. So what does a listing agreement, a listing contract do in terms of agency? What does it do? It not only gives you permission to represent the seller as a firm and as an individual broker, it also gives you and the firm the authorization to opt into dual agency. So you cannot be a dual agent unless everybody's agreed to it in writing in advance, and putting it on the front of the contract is not enough to opt into dual agency, just to be really clear there. So the listing agreement, the listing contract, is what gives the listing firm the ability to be a dual agent, because Blake and I are dual agents every time 2 people in the same office, one list, one sell, I become a dual. Somebody in Gateway lists, somebody in Gateway sells, different people, Blake becomes a dual. So there's the permission for that. And that it's critical. You have to have that before you can become a dual agency. So the other question I get about this listing contract a lot is, and Kelly and I, we went down this bunny trail before. You get an attorney for a client, he's a seller, and he says, yeah, I've made a few changes to the listing contract. And if you go ahead and sign it, then you got my listing, or you got my 6 listings, you got my whole development. These are the changes that I want on the contract. Anybody ever had that happen besides Kelly? We did. So the easy answer to that is usually the multiple doesn't allow us to modify or change the contract itself. That's not entirely true, but it's 99% of the time it's true, right? If they start playing around with commissions, or, you know, the form was written and drafted by about 5 different attorneys with the Northwest multiple. And they're not going to let you modify that or change that lightly. So if you get into that predicament, we actually got in touch with the multiple in that particular case and got them to agree to a couple of minor changes in it. But the majority of them, they said, no, we're not letting you change it. Because think about it. How would you as a buyer broker feel if when you saw a listing on the MLS, you didn't know what other modifications they'd made to the contract? It would be a free-for-all out there. So that's something just to keep in mind. That's about it on that one. Back to, so we talked about listing agreements. We talked about agency. Now I'm just going to go through, I'm going to go through some of these supplements that you may or may not know were even there. All right, here we go. The Green Building Information Supplement. Remember I talked about that before? These are the things that qualify for a green build. So it isn't just that it's energy efficient. It talks about green materials. It talks about green landscaping. It talks about green construction. There's actually a certification that you can get as a green broker, green certified, whatever. They talk about windows and heating and cooling and energy source and water conservation and appliances. There's a lot more to a green build than just being energy efficient. There's all these things. And it does have to be certified that it's either Build Green, LEED, or Northwest Energy Star. So when I switch screens like that, can somebody answer me here? Can you still see I'm on Form 18 Amendment to Exclusive Listing Agreement? Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So if you are amending a listing agreement, you may or may not know that there is actually an amendment that you can use for a price change, for an extension, or for any other agreements that you may have as a listing broker. So you can do it on a Form 34, but anytime you can have a pre-filled form, this is definitely the way to go. So letter of authorization, what is that all about? Letter of authorization, let's say you've got a contractor and he's got 5 acres right outside the city of Anacortes, and he's going to put up 12 houses, and they're just in the preliminary stages. They've got the roads in, they've got the lots platted, they're working on the different plans, but they don't have the pricing done yet. But they want you to market it. They want you to advertise it. And you're like, well, isn't that pre-marketing? Does the multiple allow us to do that? Well, you know what? Yeah, they do. And it's called, it's accomplished with something called a letter of authorization. So the letter of authorization is basically, if you come down here, it says right here, the project is currently in development. Individual units are not yet available to sell. As they become available, the seller agrees to execute individual listing agreements. So as the properties get ready to go on the market, they get priced. Maybe they're far enough along that they actually want to list them, then they do agree to list them. But it's not uncommon to see a 5-unit, 10-unit, whatever build And this is what they do. Now, anytime I've had one of these, I will share with you, I always get the multiple involved. You can put a sign up on the property. The builder's name on the sign has to be at least as big as the firm name. That's one of their little rules. So it can't be, you know, coming soon, Diane Sager, and then ABC Contractors in tiny little down at the bottom. Can't do that. Builder's name has to be at least the same size as the company or the firm name. And it's just really general information, the project name, kind of the address, if you know what it is. The address isn't even, you can see a required field. There's no dot next to it. City, state, zip code, listing date, duration. And then this is not a required field either with sales prices, just so you know. It's anticipated that sales prices will be check lots at a price range of, or houses to be and or under construction at the price of. So it's really a vague listing type agreement, but it's very, very common when you have a builder. So if somebody comes to you and wants to do some pre-marketing, don't just assume, because multiple is so deaf on this, that you can't do it, because you can. So you know. We've covered sub-agency. Let's talk about right of first refusal. So, right of first refusal. How many of you have run into a client before who says, yeah, I agreed to sell to the next door neighbor or my cousin or somebody if I ever put the property on the market? The first thing you want to ask is that agreement in writing? If it's just a handshake deal, then you have a serious conversation with the seller and say, is this something that you want to pursue? Do you want to go give him a call? Do you want to talk to him? Do you want to send him a letter? But if it's just on a handshake deal, there's no legal reason for the seller, frankly, to have to honor it.
So
Unless-
Lori, if you were going to do that and put it in writing, is there a form for you to do that? Or do you just put it in writing and have?
Well, the form for you to do that would be to get in touch with an attorney and have it drafted.
Okay.
Because there's right of first refusals can be 9 ways from Sunday. And what do I mean by that? How do you determine the price at which the right of first refusal would be exercised? Is it something that both parties just agree to? Or is it, this is more common if an attorney drafts it, especially, that the seller has to put the property on the market, get a bona fide offer to purchase, put that offer on hold, go back to the person with the right of first refusal and say, hey, Joe, I just got an offer for $700,000, but you've got right of first refusal. If you can net me the same amount of money, I'll sell it to you. Now, here's where it gets ugly for the listing broker. So in that $700,000, the listing broker is being paid a commission, right? And so is the selling broker. And let's just pick a number and say it's 5%, just out of the blue, $35,000, which brings us down to a net to the seller of $665,000, roughly off the top of my head here, right? So does Joe, the next door neighbor, have to match the $700,000 to net the seller the same amount of money? Nope, they don't. All they have to do is come in at least at $665,000, and now the seller is going to say, well, hell, it'll be a lot easier to sell it over here. Joe's a good guy. I already told him I would do it. So as right of first refusals are kind of like excluded buyers. If you're going to have one, it's best to get them out of the way in advance. Give me another really common thing that all you buyer brokers at one point or another, probably not in the too distant future, or if you haven't already, run into a right of first refusal. What kind of property? Where are they really, 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 really common? Condos. You're like, what? Condos? Homeowner associations very, very, very commonly have a right of first refusal for the HOA. Why is that? Well, there's one out here on Lake Whatcom. It's baked in, and I'll tell you the reason you never see those units hit the market is because there's other people in the complex waiting to pick up the waterfront units. So when they are delivered, that right of first refusal from the HOA as one of the homeowners in there, they jump on it. And they say, heck yeah, pick me, I'll buy it. And it never hits the market. So if you're listing a condo, or if you're representing a buyer on a condo and you're looking at those CC&Rs, be sure and check if you've got a right of first refusal. Because normally the owner doesn't know they have one. Number one, they don't know it's baked into the homeowners association, the CC&Rs. Number two, they're rarely, if ever, exercised. However, in some complexes, it's quite common for them to be exercised. So the last thing you want to do is take a listing on a property, go through all your marketing, all your staging, all your photography, all your open houses. You get 10 different offers and have the HOA come knocking on the seller's door and say, oh yeah, wait, no, Susie over here in unit 102, she has right of first refusal through the HOA and she wants to buy the property. Thanks. And what happens to that listing broker? Or what happens to that buyer broker that bought an offer? What happens? You got egg on your face. So always check for the right of first refusal. So this addendum simply says the property is subject to a prior right of first refusal. The seller may receive an offer which may result in the holder of the right of first refusal exercising its right. In the event it's exercised, this says the seller will pay a commission to the firm as though the offer triggering the right of first refusal was accepted and closed in accordance with that term. How excited do you think that seller's going to be to sign this form? In other words, if somebody from the HOA or Joe, the next door neighbor, decides to buy it, this addendum says that the listing firm is entitled to a commission. I will tell you right now, I don't see that happening. That's why if there's a right of first refusal, they usually get cleared prior to listing, or that gets struck. Here's the problem. When you put a property on the market as the listing firm, you are basically committing to the rest of the 37,000 people in the Northwest multiple that whatever you put out there as an offer for compensation to the buyer brokerage or to the firm representing the buyer, that has been pre-agreed upon and the seller has agreed to pay it. If you've got this in there and the seller balks, or you've modified it and says, no, don't worry about it, Mr. Seller, you won't have to, you got a problem. So right of first refusals are a little bit tricky. If you run into one, let me know. Normally, I don't see this enforced that the seller has to then pay the commission. So if you're representing a buyer, that's something you definitely want to know about. This form is kind of it's a good tool. Form 71, seller's request on restrictions. So why they don't just combine all of the showing restrictions onto one form, I don't know. Seller or showings temporarily suspended. I think this is for, longer than 24 hours. So the sellers have company coming into town for the weekend. You want it off the market for 72 hours. You got to fill out one of these forms and it needs to be uploaded. No concurrent showings. Yeah, I mean, that with showing time, that isn't really a problem anymore. Here's another one. Seller's request for restriction on showing and sell. This is a 7H. Actually, that was a 7I. This is a 7H. We just had a listing down on Whidbey Island, and my phone, I must have fielded 4 phone calls in one weekend because the listing broker also happened to be the seller of the property, which is no big deal. But lo and behold, he was also a mortgage broker and insisted that all the potential buyers be pre-qualified and used him as the lender for their purchase. How do you think that went over? Allison, you're shaking your head. Nope. Nope. Because if they're doing a pre-qual, what are they asking your buyers? How much money do you have in the bank? What's your job? What's your financial situation? I mean, it was such a conflict that I honestly couldn't even believe that the multiple let him get away with it. So did anybody else run into this at the same time? So what my advice was, and again, 40 years in the business, common sense has to live here somewhere. I said, ignore his request. If you've got a buyer that wants to make an offer, money will talk, submit the damn offer anyway. However, this is really common with builders. And what happens with builders, because they've got a deal struck with a certain lender, they're comfortable with that lender knows their product, the lender knows their appraisals, they know everything about the project, and they're not having to deal with Rocket Mortgage back in, New Hampshire, Timbuktu. So the seller can request that potential buyers be pre-qualified or pre-approved by the lender identified below. And then there's just the normal disclosure that by doing so, it may restrict the number of potential buyers to view the property, yada, yada, yada. I have people ask me all the time, can the seller do that? Not only can they do that, there's a form for that. They have to put in the reason for the restriction. Seller prefers this. I mean, there's no wrong answer here. They just have to fill something out. And usually how the seller gets away with mandating that is they say, if you use my preferred lender, then I will modify the price. I will throw in a free whatever. So there's a carrot, or if you don't use my preferred lender, I'm going to charge you more. They can't charge you more from the list price, but they can discount off the list price. So they can't go in and add to it, but they can certainly go in and take away from it. So when you're dealing, number one, when you're dealing with a new construction builder, never, ever, ever send your client out to preview the property without you. And telling them, hey, just tell them that I'm already working with Lori Reese at Remax is not good enough, because more and more builders have mandates as housing becomes tighter and tighter. More and more builders have mandates that the listing broker or the selling broker has to accompany the buyer on the first visit to register them. Not uncommon at all. And I'll tell you right now, you can talk to your blue in the face and builders will not move from that. Very common down in the Seattle area. Very, 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 very common. So if you've got a client that just wants to go out and look at new construction and says, hey, Jay, I'll let you know, when I find one, and then I'll have, you're not going to get paid in all likelihood. So please know that. And I'm also running into more and more situations where buyers are working with a buyer broker from Seattle, Olympia, Tacoma, wherever. And when they see a house come on market that they like, they just start calling around until they can get somebody to show it to them. I shouldn't say the poor. The Redfin agents are the ones that are really getting hit with this right now, big time. Because they know that a Redfin agent is getting paid by the showing and they'll drop everything to go show them a house. So there's a lot of listing brokers out there, especially down south, that are saying, hey, that house up in Bellingham that you want to go see, just call a Redfin broker. They'll show it to you. And then if you like it, call me and I'll come up and write it up. How are listing brokers getting around that? There is a restriction that is allowed by the multiple that does say that in order to be paid the full compensation, the selling broker has to accompany the buyer on the first showing. Kelly, are you seeing that out there at all?
I actually love that you brought that up. And I think I'm going to start adding that to every single one of my listings. And the reason being is what happens is they're all coming to our open houses. They're all requesting me show the house. I'm like, I'm not going to show your house, the house, because you're not physically here to actually tour the house and give recommendations to your client, which to me is bad representation overall, and then they don't want to keep driving up here to like go to the home inspection and measure with the family. And I mean, it's like a 4 or 5 appointment thing. And I'm sitting here going, no, this isn't going to work. I like that. And I think that should be added in because I think we're seeing more people definitely come up the I-5 corridor to try to take advantage of other agents. So.
And as a listing broker, there is absolutely nothing wrong once the property goes under contract with a broker from Olympia. We've had this happen countless times. And the broker from Olympia says, hey, Kelly, would you mind just letting that appraiser in for me? Would you mind just letting that home inspector in for me? My clients just want to go measure that bedroom one more time. Kelly, would you mind just going and opening up the door? The answer is, I'm happy to. if you want me to take over your buyer and I'll pay you a referral fee, of course, my time is just as valuable as yours is. And so you listing brokers out there, this is happening more and more and more often. So don't get caught flat-footed. The reason I'm bringing this up is because better to fix it ahead of time than wait until it happens and try and go close the door. So yeah, Kelly, I think it's a great
Where's
idea.
the verbiage for that, Lori? Or what form is that one?
It's not a form. It's one that actually it as long as you are clear that the selling broker needs to accompany the buyer on the first showing in order to be compensated. I'll reach out to Justin and get some.
Yeah, I have seen it on builder stuff and I actually like it. And I think we should all be using it more often right now, especially since we're getting hit from Seattle agents all the time. So I'm going to go in. Do I have to have my sellers sign anything or we just add them into our listings under
Nope.
the agent remarks?
No, we do, because the sellers are actually the ones who are paying the commission. So they would need to sign the form. It would probably go on just a listing amendment and it would go in the broker confidential remarks. So it does have to be on the listing, but it's totally legit and totally allowed. So you buyer brokers out there, be careful when you've got clients who are just tootling around. They get all excited because they know you're out of town this weekend, but they find the perfect house. Oh, I don't want to bother Tessa this weekend, so I'll just call a Redfin broker and go see the house, or I'll just, call the listing broker and see if they'll show it to me. If there's a clause like that in the broker comments, there's a good chance you're not going to get paid. So again, managing expectations, have that conversation with your buyer ahead of time. Be very careful. I would absolutely have the rule that you do not walk into a new construction project without me. I know you just think you want to go out and take looks and whatever, but in the majority of the cases, if that happens, you are not going to get paid. Tessa.
So I have a question. So let's say I think you know that I have buyers that consistently go to the Redfin agent route, even though I've had the conversation 100 times. And so I actually have a signed buyer agency agreement with them because I've said, hey, here's the risk that you run, right? You go tour, yada, yada. We've gone down the whole thing. So let's say, so I've got my signed buyer agency agreement that says my buyers, owe me compensation, yada, yada, yada. And then they go tour one of the houses that says selling agent must be present in order to receive full compensation. So then then what?
I think you know the answer to that one. What does that buyer brokerage agreement give you the authorization to do?
To go negotiate for my compensation.
That's correct. But now you got to go negotiate for something that should have been an automatic, right? It should have been a given that when you bring the offer, you are going to be compensated. However, now they've thrown a little wrench in this. And now, technically, because of the verbiage that the seller has agreed to, the seller doesn't owe you squat for a selling office commission. So you're going to go hand in hand with your buyer brokerage agreement and go try and renegotiate what should have been yours already. You can do it. There's absolutely, as long as you have a buyer brokerage agreement, there's nothing to prohibit you from going and negotiating that commission. But are they under obligation? So I think what you were asking is, does the buyer brokerage agreement trump that comment? And the answer is no. The answer is no. The listing is going to trump your buyer brokerage agreement. Your buyer brokerage agreement gives you the authority to either collect from the buyer, obviously, or go negotiate your way back into the thing, which with a regular seller, you'd probably have success. I will share with you with a builder, especially down in Seattle, they're going to tell you to pound sand. Don't worry about it. We'll take good care of your client. Have a nice day. And you're not going to get paid. I absolutely, positively, almost guarantee that is what is going to happen. They do not budge, especially some of the bigger builders down there. They don't want real estate brokers involved in their transactions. They really want to do it themselves. Life is so much easier without having a third party in there screwing up their new build. And even if the buyer goes back and says, yeah, but Tessa has to be involved. I won't do this unless Tessa's involved. They'll be like, great, then you're not going to buy the house. What is your buyer going to say at that point? They love Tessa, but they really want to buy a house. So that puts your buyers in a really uncomfortable situation.
Tessa, I'm so proud of you. You always get buyer's agency agreements signed. That's awesome. I love hearing that. Very rare.
In this,
It's so easy. It's just, it's like, hey, if I were going to take a listing, you'd sign an agreement. And so if you guys want to hire me, this is how you hire me. If you want to work with, like, it just puts it in writing.
Tessa,
And it, like, if you're not intimidated.
meeting. I want to have you talk because I love hearing that you say it's so freaking easy. That's awesome.
I think
they just sign it. They're like, okay, they don't know any different, right? If you want to work with me, this is how you hire me, and we make it official. Done.
It's a mindset of Tessa's of how she, and I completely agree, because this is how she learned, was I would no more go start marketing a house without a listing agreement than I would go start marketing or working with a buyer without a buyer brokerage agreement. It's how I work. It's just, and the time to do it, again, is not right before you write an offer. It's and it's happening more and more. The time to do it is when you're managing those expectations and having that conversation. How do I strategize with my offer? Oh, and by the way, if you want me to be representing you, I can only represent so many people. I'm physically only able to represent so many people at a time. So if you want to hire me, how am I doing, Tessa?
Good. And the other part is that if you're not comfortable signing that, that's okay. And I understand, but priority is given to my clients who have officially hired me by signing the buyer broker agreement. And so because inventory is so limited, because there's only so many houses and I have clients looking in the same area, if two of you call and one of you has a signed buyer agency agreement, that's where the preference is going to go. And so it just, you know, where do you want to be?
Fear of loss is a wonderful thing.
Oh, I love it. That's a great role play, Tessa. You're crushing it.
Thanks.
Love it.
It's true. Because again, buyers are panicked in this market. Interest rates are going up, inflation's through the roof, housing inventory is shrinking. They may love you like a brother or a sister, but trust me, if they don't have a buyer brokerage agreement with you and they see a for sale by owner, or they walk into an open house where the listing broker says, hey, if you write the offer through me, I'm going to move you to the front of the line. They may love you like a brother or sister, but you are getting kicked to the curb. I will guarantee it. It's happening. So if you're not comfortable with these buyer brokerage agreements, let's practice. Let's role play. It's a mindset. You just have to get it in your brain that this is how I work. And you're worth it, for God's sakes. You're all worth it. All right. So a couple more things, and then I'm going to skip over to the Form 17. More seller restrictions. This is just if, so a question I get on this, because this is where the seller's name and phone number are withheld. And you have to upload it along with the listing. And of course, the question is, well, if I upload it, won't everybody in the multiple see it? No. If you attach it to the correct form on the upload, it's blocked from view from everybody else. I had the same question years ago. So there you go. All they need to do is click realist. Oh, and by the way, if I ever see another offer come through here on the purchase and sale agreement where it says seller's name undisclosed, I'm going to thump you. You do not have a valid contract with Mr. Undisclosed, just so you know. So where do you go get that? You click the little realist button in the listing and it will take you to the property profile, which will give you the seller's name. You do not autofill Mr. Undisclosed. I see that every once in a while and it just makes me laugh. So it's, yeah, it makes the sellers feel better more than anything. So just an FYI. All right, any other questions on listings? I tried to incorporate a lot of buyer strategies. Are there any other strategies that you guys have used when you see something in particular on a listing? Anything else? Did you learn anything on that part today? Any other little strategies that you might be using, I hope? All right, moving along. Let's talk about the seller disclosure, which, oh, by the way, we have the Washington Realtors to thank for this form not getting changed. This was your RPAC dollars hard at work. Because the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they wanted to change the seller disclosure statement to not include this right here. I think it was don't know. Brad, are you still on the call? I'm not sure if you are or not. They wanted to get rid of, they wanted to get rid of don't know. So the three choices would be yes, no, and NA. Now, I'm sorry, but there are questions on here that the seller may legitimately not know, or more commonly, mom and dad are living in a house. They've lived there for 40 years. They move into an assisted living. Son flies out from Chicago and is helping them put the property on the market. Now, mom and dad have dementia, and son is being given the authority by the courts to has the power of attorney sign on their behalf. You hand them a Form 17 and say, fill this out. What are they going to say? What are they going to say? Hell, I don't know. I've never even lived in the house, or I haven't lived in it for 40 years. I don't know what all these things are. So don't know is a really good column to be able to utilize. The first one, the most common one that people miss is the seller occupying the property? That's just a rookie mistake. They talk about the title. Do you have the legal authority to sell? It amazes me how many people don't bother to pull a property profile to go see if the owner of record actually matches the person that you're talking to. Usually it does, but occasionally it doesn't. Here is where you are going to have the conversation, because the seller, trust me, will conveniently forget to tell you about the right of first refusal, about the option, about the lease or rental agreement, or is there a life estate on the property? All of those things are going to create, it's not insurmountable, but they're going to create little hurdles that you're going to need to get over. And oh, by the way, if you're representing a buyer, this is a really quick and easy way to find out if there's a right of first refusal on the property. I think there's a checkbox on the listing, or anything else, a lease or rental agreement. And oh, by the way, it also says up here, there's an asterisk. If the answer is yes to a question, please explain your answer. So if there is a lease or rental agreement, it would make sense that the seller is obligated to attach that to the Form 17. If there's a life estate, some kind of documentation on that, a right of first refusal, again, because those are all asterisks. This is something that, as a buyer broker going through with a client, this is your starting point. This is certainly not your finish line. But this is a really, really good thing to download or email to your client, the buyer, and tell them to go through it. And then, oh, by the way, you need to go through it as well. Listing brokers, when you get that preliminary title, please, God, take the time to read it. Please find out if there's any clouds on title. Please find out if they owe more on the property than what they're asking you to sell it for. Encroachments, we've talked about all of that. Private road or easement agreements for access to the property. If there is, and there's a lender involved, there's a good likelihood the lender is going to want a copy of the private road agreement stating who is responsible for maintaining it. Are there any written agreements for the joint maintenance? They talk about that. So there might be one, but there isn't an agreement for it. You want to know, when you're representing a buyer, what that looks like. Assessments, zoning violations, surveys, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Talks about water. A lot of questions about water lately with wells. You know that in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, if the property is served by a well, you can go online to the, I think it's the DOE. I know in Whatcom and Skagit anyway, I haven't checked Island and Snohomish, but you can actually get the original well report in a lot of cases, not all cases, but in most cases, you can go back to when that well was actually dug, and it will not only tell you how deep it went, but it will also tell you what the findings were for the purity of the water, the potability of the water, what minerals they found in the water. Just a reminder, if you're doing a well inspection, number one, it goes until it's actually completed or until closing. But when you are having the water tested, don't just do the basic test. Please, please, please do the more enhanced test that will check for salination and other things in the water. So irrigation, outdoor sprinklers, sewer on-site sewage, and are there any fees? When was it last pumped? That's an important one. Are there any defects? When was it last inspected? You know, there's a difference between pumping and inspection. How many bedrooms was the on-site sewer system approved? Don't guess on this. Don't go by what the seller tells you. Please, please, please. If it's not online, please get a hold of the proper county resources and get a copy of the permit, because you cannot sell a house advertising more bedrooms than the septic permit is for. So if it's a 3-bedroom septic, but it's got 4 bedrooms, you're going to call that 4th bedroom an office, a den, something other than a bedroom. And that one is, I don't mean to make light of it, because I have seen big lawsuits come about because of that. You sell a house as a 4-bedroom, and oh, by the way, it's the buyer broker that gets sued, because it's a family with 3 kids. They move in, the septic immediately overflows. They go down to the county. They find out that it was only a 3-bedroom septic. It was marketed as a 4. And I will share with you, that's when lawsuits start flying. So do check that. Here's one that has caused a lot of comments lately. Has a roof leaked? Has the basement flooded or leaked? And you notice these are all asterisks. Are there any conversions? Did they get permits? Did they get a final inspection? And then this is one that a lot of people don't know is on here or never paid attention to. Was a structural pest or whole house inspection done? Did they have an inspection done recently or when they purchased the property? And then it says, if yes, when and by whom was the inspection completed? And there's a little asterisk, and the answer that you're thinking is yes, you're supposed to include that on the Form 17. Now, I will share with you the reality is that most listing brokers don't. Most sellers say, oh, hell, I don't know, whatever happened to that. It was so long ago. But on the flip side, if you do a pre-inspection before you list the property and it asks this, you're going to have to tell them, yes, one was done, and then attach it. Here's where the problem rises. You have one done, it lists a whole bunch of little things that need to be corrected. The seller goes out and corrects them all, but you still have to attach the old inspection that goes along with it. So that's where you can actually do a narrative. You can attach to the inspection. You can cover the items that were corrected. You can provide receipts if you've got them, all of that type of thing. Disclosure is always better than not disclosure. Talks about systems, wood burning appliances. The environmental is really the only thing they can't skip. What I do want to cover back here, again, if the answer is yes, please explain on additional sheets if necessary. So if you are asked about the demographics of a neighborhood with regards to, or anything, house, murders, sex offenders, criminal activity, that is not anything that the seller is required in the state of Washington to disclose, just so you know. If the buyer is concerned about that, then you are going to point them to the appropriate police or sheriff records, because all of that is kept. But there is nothing to say that that has to be disclosed in a property. I have a different opinion. I would definitely have a conversation with the seller about disclosing that, but they're under no obligation to do so. Talks about oil tanks, oil heating tanks, and everything else. So let's talk strategies here for a minute, because I don't know if you've really taken a deep dive and actually looked at the different signature lines, and then we're going to wrap up. So the first one says, buyer hereby acknowledges receipt of a copy of this disclosure statement and acknowledges that disclosures made herein are those of the sellers only and not of the real estate licensee. That's our get out of jail free card. Should your buyer sign the first line? Absolutely. That just starts the clock ticking. Now, I've had some people say, well, the seller disclosure is actually uploaded. Didn't it start ticking when I downloaded it and gave it to them? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. If they want to waive it and say, yeah, but they've been looking at it for a week, they're totally comfortable, they want to sign off, then go ahead and have them sign number 2, buyer's waiver of the right to revoke an offer. You're trying to make your offer as attractive as possible. It's still amazing to me how many listing brokers don't upload these, but if there is one and your buyer has had sufficient time to review it, then they may want to go ahead and sign the second line, which is the waiver of the right to revoke the offer, which is different from the waiver of the right to receive a completed seller disclosure. That is going to happen in either, usually it's been my experience, new construction, estates. Well, actually, estates don't have to provide them if the title has not transferred. If the title's transferred, they do. But again, the situation with mom and dad, maybe with dementia, you've got power of attorney, and you say, I just don't want to fill one out at all. And so you will see an occasional request that the buyer just waive the right to receive it. That's certainly an option that the listing broker can ask for. A lot of times sellers or buyers aren't comfortable with that, but here's what I tell my buyers, or here's what I would recommend. You tell them, look, if that is out there and they're not providing a Form 17, if you don't sign the third one, your right to revoke the offer, if you haven't received a completed one, survives all the way up until closing. It dies on closing. It doesn't survive closing. You can't go back after the fact, after closing, and rescind an offer. But you can rescind right up until closing if the seller doesn't provide one. However, if you're in a situation and you want to make your offer strong and the seller is refusing to provide one, then you have a conversation managing expectations with that buyer to talk about the possibility of having them waiving the right to receive a completed seller disclosure statement. It's not best practice, but again, it's something that you may want to have a conversation with them. If they did provide it, then signing number 1 and number 2, Annie doesn't like us to sign number 2 at the time we write our offer. But I say, if it's been online and the buyers have had several days to take a look at it, they're totally comfortable, why not? It's one more door that you might be able to slam to get your offer accepted. So, buyer signs, seller's initials, and I think, here was another form, accessibility information form. So if you do check that it's wheelchair accessible or ADU accessible, there is a form that you do have to attach, and there's some requirements. There's just kind of like a green build that goes along with it. Let's make sure I covered everything else. We did that one. Here's one. Seller requests a broker be present from the listing brokerage, be present at all showings of the property. High-end properties, that is not unusual. So those are just some of the addendums that are out there that you may or may not have been familiar with. So,
Lori, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So in terms of the Form 17, and let's say it's an estate sale, so there's not one provided.
Let's stop there for 2 seconds.
Okay.
Because there's 2 kinds of estate sale holding title. Somebody passes away and the property then reverts into the ownership by the estate. Okay? No Form 17 required. However, if the estate then is settled and directs that property to be given to the 3 kids, Sam, Susie, and Fred, and then the estate goes ahead and passes title to Sam, Susie, and Fred, and then Sam, Susie, and Fred decide to put the property on the market as sellers, a Form 17 is required. Once title transfers out of the estate, it nullifies the requirement that no Form 17 is required. Sorry, that was a bunny trail. Go ahead, Lori.
No, that's great, because I don't know if I've heard that. So one time I saw a Form 17 that had been redlined by the listing broker. Can you explain that situation?
So explain to me a little bit more what redline you mean.
They just went through Authentisign.
Yeah. So that is basically a seller saying, pound sand, I'm not filling one of those out. If they want to buy my house, they ain't getting a Form 17 for me. it's basically the listing broker putting everybody on notice. My seller's not going to provide one, and then hopefully going and saying, and if you want your offer to be considered, you're going to have to sign the third part of the Form 17, waiving the right. Because in the listing agreement, it says Form 17, provided, yes or no. Sometimes people don't catch that. So I guess attaching one with a big red line through it is like in your face. We're not giving you one. Again, pound sand. If you are a listing broker though, and your seller refuses to provide one, and you upload it with the red line, and you get an offer from a buyer who doesn't sign the second or third line, they just sign acknowledging receipt, that buyer reserves the right to walk away from that transaction right up until the date of closing. Right up until the day of closing. Yeah, I've seen those occasionally too. So I think that's probably how that happens. Good question. Anybody else? And that was kind of dry for you buyer brokers today. So hang in there with me because it will get better. But I hope you learned something. I hope you learned kind of sometimes looking at things from a different side of the transaction gives you insight into structuring the transaction for your buyer. And I hope if nothing else, you take away managing expectations for your buyer in this market is critical. So you need to understand the forms. You need to understand where the information is coming from. I hope everybody on this call goes and practice your script about using a buyer brokerage agreement, because you're going to get burned if you don't. I will guarantee you it will happen sooner. It will happen later, but it will happen. They'll find a FSBO. They'll call you up and say, oh my God, we love you, but aren't you excited for us? We drove down the street that we just love and this house came on the market. And you call the seller and he says, I hate realtors. I don't want you setting foot in my house. And you just lost a client. Our time is all we have in this business. It is just how we work. It's how we get paid. So be a professional, learn your scripts, learn your dialogues, get comfortable with the forms. It's just going to look. So we're meeting again on Wednesday at 8:30. And our topic will be, oh, this is a good one. Vacant land purchase and sale agreement and addendums, because vacant land is getting more and more and more popular. And there's a lot of different addendums on that. And we're going to be covering them Wednesday morning, 8:30. So I will see you then. Thank you guys all for joining me. Have a great day.